The passengers on Flight 2845 fell silent as they witnessed the confrontation. Jamal Washington, dressed in a tailored suit, stood frozen in the first-class aisle as Captain Richard Brooks pointed toward Coach. "This isn't your seat, boy. Go back where you belong." No one expected what would happen next. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to catch more stories of unexpected twists and powerful comebacks. Now, let's find out how this young executive's journey took an unforgettable turn at 30,000 feet. 28-year-old Jamal Washington had always been exceptional. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, he'd been raised by his single mother, Diane, who worked 2 jobs to provide for him. Despite the financial struggles, she had instilled in him an unwavering belief in his abilities and a fierce determination to succeed. "Education is the one thing nobody can take from you," she would tell him each morning before school. And Jamal took those words to heart. He excelled academically, earning a full scholarship to Howard University, where he graduated with honors before completing his MBA with specialization in aviation management. His path hadn't been easy. Throughout his education and early career at regional airlines, Jamal had encountered prejudice in various forms. From professors who seemed surprised by his articulate presentations to colleagues who attributed his success to diversity quotas rather than merit, he had learned to navigate a world that often underestimated him based on his skin color. But Jamal's exceptional analytical skills and innovative approaches to airline efficiency had caught the attention of Harold Thompson, the 62-year-old white CEO of Skyline Airways, one of the nation's largest carriers. After watching Jamal's presentation at an aviation conference, Thompson had approached him personally. "Son, I've been in this business for 40 years and I've never seen anyone break down the complexities of route optimization the way you just did," Thompson had told him. "Skyline needs fresh thinking like yours." 2 weeks later, Jamal was offered the position of Executive Vice President of Operations at Skyline Airways, making him the youngest executive in the company's history and one of the few black executives in the predominantly white airline industry. The night before his first official flight in his new role, Jamal sat in his hotel room in Atlanta reviewing the company reports. Skyline had been losing market share to more innovative carriers, and customer satisfaction scores were dropping, particularly in their in-flight experience category. CEO Thompson had given Jamal a clear directive: to find out what was really happening on their flights and fix it. "Don't tell anyone who you are," Thompson had advised. "I want you to experience our service exactly as our passengers do. No special treatment." Jamal called his mother that evening, his voice betraying both excitement and apprehension. "Mom, tomorrow's the big day. My first undercover evaluation. I'm so proud of you, baby." Diane Washington replied, her voice warm with emotion. "But remember what I told you when you were little." Jamal smiled. "No matter how high I fly, keep my feet on the ground." "That's right. And no matter what title they give you, to some people, you'll always be just another black man they think doesn't belong. Don't let it shake you." After hanging up, Jamal meticulously prepared for his assignment. He reviewed the personnel files of the crew for Flight 2845 from Atlanta to San Francisco, studied the aircraft specifications, and analyzed recent customer feedback. He wanted to be thorough in his assessment. As he packed his leather briefcase with his company laptop notebook and the first-class ticket that would allow him to observe the premium service experience, Jamal felt the weight of his new responsibility. It wasn't just about his own success anymore. As one of the few black executives in the industry, he carried the unspoken burden of representation. His performance would inevitably affect how other people of color might be perceived and treated in similar positions. He straightened his custom-tailored navy suit and adjusted his red tie in the hotel mirror. The face that looked back at him was youthful, but determined. At 28, he looked younger than most executives, especially in the conservative airline industry. Combined with his race, Jamal knew his appearance would lead some to question his authority and expertise. Just another day proving them wrong, he whispered to himself, a mantra that had carried him through countless situations where he'd been underestimated. As he set his alarm for the early morning flight, Jamal had no idea that Flight 2845 would test his resolve in ways he couldn't imagine becoming. Not just an evaluation of Skyline's service, but a pivotal moment in his career and life. Atlanta International Airport buzzed with the usual morning chaos as Jamal arrived for Skyline Airways Flight 2845 to San Francisco. He navigated through the crowded terminal, rolling his carry-on beside him, briefcase tucked neatly under his arm. He deliberately dressed the part of a successful business traveler, tailored suit, polished Oxford shoes, and a subtle platinum tie clip that had been a graduation gift from his mother. When he reached the priority check-in counter, the gate agent, Melissa Parker, a blonde woman in her mid-40s, glanced up with the practiced smile of someone who had greeted thousands of passengers. That smile faltered slightly when she saw Jamal. "Good morning, Jamal," said, sliding his ID and first-class ticket across the counter. Melissa picked up his documents, her eyes darting between his face and his ID with barely disguised suspicion. "And how did you acquire this ticket, sir?" she asked, emphasizing the last word in a way that suggested it was a courtesy she didn't feel he deserved. "I purchased it," Jamal replied, evenly maintaining eye contact. She examined his ticket again. "This is a first-class ticket. First class is quite expensive." Jamal noticed that the white businessman who had checked in before him hadn't faced similar questioning. "Yes, I'm aware of the cost," he said, his tone pleasant but firm. "I'll need to verify this," she said, tapping at her computer with unnecessary force. There seemed to be a lot of upgrades happening lately. As Melissa continued to scrutinize his documentation, Jamal maintained his composure, though his heart rate had picked up. This wasn't new to him. Throughout his life, he'd been questioned about his presence. In spaces where black faces were rare, elite universities, executive conferences, luxury stores, he had developed a practiced calm for such situations. After what seemed like an unnecessarily long verification process, Melissa reluctantly handed back his documents. "You're cleared to board with the first group," she said, her tone suggesting she'd uncovered some sort of fraud but couldn't prove it. As Jamal moved toward the waiting area for priority boarding, he felt the eyes of other passengers on him. In the designated first-class seating area, an elderly white couple, the Wilsons, looked up as he sat across from them. "You must be a basketball player," Mr. Wilson said with a smile that suggested he thought he was paying Jamal a compliment. "No, sir, I'm not," Jamal replied politely. "Football," then Mrs. Wilson chimed in, peering at him over her reading glasses. "I'm in corporate aviation, actually," Jamal explained, having had this conversation countless times before. "Oh," Mrs. Wilson exclaimed with surprise. "Like a flight attendant?" "No, I work on the business side." Jamal clarified, deliberately keeping his exact position vague, as per CEO Thompson's instructions. The couple exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of confusion and discomfort at having their assumptions challenged. Before the conversation could continue, the boarding announcement came over the PA system. "We would like to welcome our first-class and priority passengers for Skyline Airways Flight 2845 to San Francisco." Jamal stood, nodding politely to the Wilsons before moving toward the gate. As he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, he overheard a man behind him mutter to his companion, "Since when does Skyline give out free upgrades to meet quotas?" Ignoring the comment, Jamal boarded the plane and was greeted by flight attendant Veronica Summers, a professional-looking woman in her 30s with auburn hair pulled back into a neat bun. "Welcome aboard, sir," she said, with a genuine smile, directing him down the aisle to his seat. Jamal settled into seat 2. A plush window seat in the premium first-class section. As other first-class passengers boarded, he noted their reactions to his presence. Some did a double take, others glanced at their tickets as if to confirm they were in the right cabin, seemingly surprised to be sharing the luxury section with a young black man. From his seat, Jamal could hear snippets of conversation. Must have used points. Probably some diversity program thing. He took out his notebook and discreetly began making notes, recording these initial observations about passenger interactions and subtle biases. This was exactly the kind of real passenger experience that CEO Thompson wanted him to document. As the final first-class passengers boarded, Jamal observed their treatment by the crew. Flight attendant Tyler Johnson, a tall man with a friendly demeanor, offered pre-flight champagne to everyone in the cabin. When he reached Jamal, however, there was a slight hesitation. "Would you care for champagne as well?" Sir Tyler asked, his inflection suggesting surprise that Jamal might want the same service offered to other first-class passengers. "Yes, thank you," Jamal replied, making another note in his book. So far, the subtle discrimination was following familiar patterns, not outright hostility, but small indignities and assumptions that accumulated over time, wearing down even the most resilient person. As the coach passengers filed past toward the back of the plane, Jamal caught several curious glances. He maintained his professional demeanor, reviewing work documents while sipping his champagne. He was here to do a job, to experience the service as any other first-class passenger would. But already, it was clear that his experience would be anything but typical. Little did he know that the real test was about to begin when the captain emerged from the cockpit for his pre-flight inspection. 20 minutes before scheduled departure, Captain Richard Brooks emerged from the cockpit for his routine pre-flight check. A tall man in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and the confident bearing that came with 30 years of flying commercial aircraft, Brooks moved down the aisle with the authority of someone used to being in command. As he walked through first class, his eyes swept over the passengers, offering curt nods to the regulars he recognized. When his gaze landed on Jamal, his expression hardened. He paused, looking Jamal up and down with unconcealed disapproval. "Excuse me," Captain Brooks said loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I believe there's been a mistake." Jamal looked up from his tablet where he'd been reviewing company documents. "Is there a problem, sir?" The captain's eyes narrowed. "This is the first-class cabin. Coach is in the back of the aircraft." He pointed down the aisle toward economy class. "This isn't your seat, boy. Go back where you belong." The word boy hung in the air, loaded with historical weight and condescension. A hush fell over the first-class cabin. Several passengers looked down uncomfortably while others watched with undisguised interest. Jamal felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the physical manifestation of the anger and humiliation that came with such encounters. He had experienced similar situations throughout his life, but it never got easier. Still, years of navigating these waters had taught him control. "I have a first-class ticket," Jamal said, calmly reaching for his boarding pass. "Let me see that," Brooks demanded, snatching the document from Jamal's hand. He examined it with exaggerated scrutiny, as if searching for evidence of forgery. There must be some mix-up at the gate. From the galley, flight attendant Veronica Summers watched the interaction with growing discomfort. She moved toward them, but hesitated, torn between professional duty and reluctance to challenge the captain's authority. "Captain Brooks," she finally said, "I checked his boarding pass during entry. It's valid for this seat." Brooks ignored her, still staring at Jamal's ticket. From the cockpit doorway, co-pilot Travis Miller observed the scene with a frown deepening on his face. "Is everything all right?" Captain Miller called out. "Just sorting out a seating situation," Brooks replied without looking back. Jamal remained composed, though his heart pounded. This was no longer about subtle microaggressions. This was overt discrimination happening in front of a plane full of witnesses. As an executive evaluating service quality, he should document this. As a black man being humiliated, he wanted to respond with the anger he felt. The professional in him won out. "If you check the passenger manifest," Jamal suggested evenly, "you'll find I'm assigned to this seat. I'd be happy to show you my ID as well." He reached for his wallet. Captain Brooks reluctantly looked at Jamal's driver's license, then handed back both documents with visible reluctance. "Well, must be some mix-up," he muttered, offering no apology. "We need to maintain certain standards in first class." As Brooks turned to leave, flight attendant Tyler Johnson approached with apparent casualness. "Can I get you another beverage before takeoff, sir?" he asked Jamal, his eyes communicating an unspoken apology. "Water would be fine, thank you, Jamal," replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. As Tyler moved to the galley, he exchanged glances with Veronica, who shook her head slightly in disgust at the captain's behavior. "I can't believe he did that," she whispered when they were out of earshot. "Not the first time," Tyler replied quietly. "Remember that doctor from Nigeria last month?" In his seat, Jamal discreetly added detailed notes about the incident to his evaluation file. His hands were steady, but inside he felt the familiar weight of having to maintain composure in the face of public humiliation. He was both the professional conducting an evaluation and the subject of discrimination, a complex position that illustrated exactly why CEO Thompson had wanted him to experience the airline's service firsthand. An older white businessman across the aisle leaned toward Jamal. "That was completely inappropriate," he said, in a low voice. "You handled it with more grace than I would have." Jamal nodded in acknowledgement. "Unfortunately, it's not an unfamiliar experience." As the final preparations for takeoff began, Jamal noticed other passengers stealing glances at him. Some seemed embarrassed by what they had witnessed, others curious, and a few appeared to share the captain's evident belief that Jamal somehow didn't belong in first class. From his seat, he could hear Captain Brooks making announcements in the cockpit, his voice carrying through the open door as he spoke to the control tower. The same voice that had just called him boy now projected professional authority as he prepared to fly the aircraft. Jamal took a deep breath and refocused on his task. This flight had already provided valuable insights into the airline's culture, though not in the way he had anticipated. The question now was how the rest of the crew would conduct themselves and what actions he would need to recommend once they landed in San Francisco. As the aircraft doors closed and the safety demonstration began, Jamal couldn't help but wonder if things would be different if the crew knew who he really was. He was about to find out. 2 hours into the flight to San Francisco, the tension in the first-class cabin remained palpable. The initial confrontation between Captain Brooks and Jamal had cast a shadow over the otherwise routine service. Jamal sat quietly working on his laptop, reviewing Skyline Airways performance data and adding detailed notes about his observations. Flight attendant Tyler Johnson moved through the cabin, refilling drinks and checking on passengers. When he reached Jamal's seat, he glanced down at the laptop screen. His eyes widened slightly as he noticed the confidential executive dashboard displaying fleet utilization statistics, cost analyses, and internal performance metrics that only senior management would have access to. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" Tyler asked, his tone noticeably more attentive than earlier. "I'm fine for now. Thank you," Jamal replied, catching the shift in the flight attendant's demeanor. As Tyler retreated to the galley, he pulled Veronica aside. "You know the passenger in 2A, the one the captain." Tyler trailed off. "The one Brooks humiliated." "What about him?" Veronica asked, keeping her voice low. "He's looking at executive-level reports on his laptop, like the kind only upper management sees, and his document header said EVP Operational Assessment." Veronica's expression changed from confusion to alarm. EVP, as in Executive Vice President. "I think we need to check the manifest again," Tyler suggested. Veronica pulled out the crew tablet and navigated to the passenger information. She scrolled down to seat 2A. "Jamal Washington," she read. then gasped softly as she saw the notation, Skyline Airways, EVP Operations ONF. "What does conf mean?" Tyler asked. "Confidential," Veronica whispered. "They use that tag for executives traveling incognito." She looked up at Tyler, her face pale. "He's the new EVP that Thompson hired, the one they announced last month." Tyler ran a hand through his hair. "The one who's supposed to be reviewing service quality and making recommendations for major changes." Veronica nodded slowly. "And Brooks called him Boy and tried to send him to coach." "We need to call ground staff to confirm," Tyler said, reaching for the crew phone. While the flight attendants made their discreet inquiries, Jamal continued his evaluation. His seatmate Benjamin Hayes, a marketing executive in his 40s, had witnessed the earlier confrontation and now attempted conversation. "Quite a start to the flight," Hayes commented. "I fly this route twice a month and I've never seen Captain Brooks act that way before." "Really?" Jamal asked, genuinely curious. "So this behavior isn't typical?" Well, Hayes hesitated. "I've seen him be brusque with staff, but never with passengers, especially not first-class passengers." The implication hung in the air that Brooks' behavior seemed specifically targeted at Jamal's race. Their conversation was interrupted by the captain's voice over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Brooks speaking. We're cruising at 37000 feet. Weather in San Francisco looks clear, and we should arrive on schedule. Our flight attendants will continue to provide the high-quality service that our premium passengers expect from Skyline Airways service that maintains our traditional standards." The emphasis on traditional standards wasn't lost on Jamal or several other passengers who exchanged glances at the thinly veiled reference. In the galley, Veronica hung up the crew phone, her expression grave, as she turned to Tyler. "Ground confirmed it. He's not just an executive, he's the executive. Thompson's protege. He's conducting an undercover evaluation of in-flight service quality." "We're dead," Tyler whispered, "after how the captain treated him." "Not just the captain," Veronica admitted. "The gate agent questioned his ticket repeatedly. I saw it happen but didn't intervene. And even I hesitated when Brooks confronted him." "We need to tell the captain," Tyler said. "You think that will make it better?" Veronica asked skeptically. "You know Brooks. He'll just get defensive or make it worse." In the cockpit, co-pilot Travis Miller had noticed the unusual activity among the flight attendants and their concerned glances toward first class. When he stepped out to use the lavatory, he quietly asked Tyler what was happening. After learning about Jamal's identity, Travis returned to the cockpit, debating whether to inform Captain Brooks. The captain was notoriously resistant to criticism, particularly from younger crew members. But this situation seemed too significant to ignore. "So, what do you think? Is it better for the co-pilot to tell Captain Brooks about Jamal's true identity, or let him discover it on his own?" Comment number 1. If you think Travis should inform the captain immediately. Or number 2. If you believe he should wait. While we're at it, hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination and stood up against it, and subscribe to catch the next part of this incredible story. What do you think will happen when the captain discovers who Jamal really is? Will he apologize or make the situation even worse? Let's continue and find out. Back in first class, Jamal was beginning to notice the changed atmosphere. The flight attendants were now providing him with exceptionally attentive service, offering premium snacks and drinks before he could request them, addressing him with noticeable deference. The shift was so dramatic that other passengers had begun to notice. Mrs. Wilson, the elderly woman who had assumed he was an athlete, leaned across the aisle. "They certainly changed their tune with you," she observed. "Did you say something to them?" "No," Jamal replied honestly. "I haven't said anything." But something had clearly changed, and as Jamal continued his detailed evaluation, he wondered how the crew's behavior would evolve when they reached their destination. and what recommendations he would ultimately make to CEO Thompson about the culture at Skyline Airways. Word traveled quickly through the aircraft. Like a game of telephone at 37,000 feet, the revelation of Jamal Washington's true identity transformed from whispered speculation in the galley to confirmed fact among the crew within minutes. He's the new executive VP, Veronica quietly informed senior flight attendant Regina Martinez in economy class, the one Thompson personally recruited to overhaul operations. "Are you serious?" Regina's eyes widened, and Brooks called him boy. In front of the entire first-class cabin, Veronica confirmed, "I've never been so embarrassed to wear this uniform." The news continued to spread, reaching flight attendants Carter Williams and Alicia Peterson at the rear of the aircraft. "This is worse than the incident with the Korean family last month," Carter muttered. "At least that wasn't in front of everyone." Back in first class, the change in service was becoming increasingly apparent. Tyler approached Jamal's seat with a warm towel on a silver tray, something that hadn't been offered to any other passenger. "Mr. Washington, can I get you anything else? Perhaps some noise-canceling headphones or a premium wine from our reserve selection." Jamal noted the use of his name, which he hadn't provided to any crew member, and the sudden upgrade in service offerings. "No thank you, Tyler," he replied, reading the flight attendant's name tag. "I'm fine for now." Tyler hesitated, clearly wanting to say more. Finally, he lowered his voice. "Sir, I want to personally apologize for the incident earlier. It doesn't reflect the values that many of us at Skyline try to uphold." It was a carefully worded apology, acknowledging the wrong without directly criticizing the captain. Jamal appreciated the gesture, but remained professionally neutral. "Thank you, Tyler. I'm documenting all aspects of this flight experience." Tyler nodded, understanding the implied message. He moved away, but not before several nearby passengers noted the deferential interaction. In the cockpit, co-pilot Travis Miller had finally worked up the courage to address Captain Brooks. "Captain, there's something you should know about the passenger in 2A. Brooks barely glanced up from the flight controls. "What about him?" "His name is Jamal Washington. He's the new executive vice president of operations at Skyline." Brooks' hands froze momentarily over the controls. "That's not possible. Thompson said the new EVP wouldn't be starting field evaluations until next week." Ground staff confirmed it. "He's conducting an undercover service quality assessment." The captain's face flushed red, either from embarrassment or anger. Perhaps both. "Why wasn't I informed before takeoff?" "That's the point of an undercover assessment, isn't it?" Travis replied carefully. "To experience service as it really is." Brooks fell silent, his jaw tightening. After several tense moments, he spoke again. "It doesn't matter who he is. If he wants to play these games, fine. I've been flying for Skyline for 28 years. He's been with the company for a month. We'll see who Thompson listens to when this is over." Travis recognized the defensive response as typical of Brooks, who had always struggled to acknowledge mistakes. But he also knew this situation was far more serious than the captain's usual conflicts with crew members. Meanwhile, in the main cabin, news had begun to leak to the passengers. The Wilsons, who had earlier assumed Jamal was an athlete, were now visibly embarrassed as they learned bits of information from overhearing crew conversations. "We made such fools of ourselves," Mrs. Wilson whispered to her husband. "An executive at his age, and we treated him like we always do," Mr. Wilson finished sadly. "Always making assumptions." Benjamin Hayes, Jamal's seatmate, had picked up on the changing dynamic as well. "I've been flying Skyline for 15 years, he told Jamal. "I've never seen flight attendants this attentive. Something's changed in the last hour." Jamal smiled diplomatically. "Perhaps they're just providing good service." "No, it's more than that," Hayes insisted. "The way they're looking at you, it's like they're afraid." He studied Jamal more carefully. "You're not just another passenger, are you?" "We're all just passengers, trying to reach our destination." Jamal replied, neither confirming nor denying. Hayes laughed. "Diplomatic answer. Well, whoever you are, you handled that situation with the captain with remarkable composure. Most people would have lost their cool. When you experience these situations often enough, you develop a certain resilience, Jamal explained, though it never gets easier. This honest admission seemed to affect Hayes deeply. I've never had to develop that kind of resilience, he acknowledged. I've never had to. In economy class, the news continued to spread. Jamal didn't know it, but several black passengers in coach had witnessed the earlier confrontation during boarding. One of them, Dr. Keisha Johnson, a professor at UC Berkeley, had been about to speak up before Jamal handled the situation himself. When she overheard flight attendants discussing Jamal's position, she felt a complex mixture of emotions, pride in his achievement and position of authority, anger at how he'd been treated despite his status, and the sobering realization that even executive credentials couldn't shield black passengers from discrimination. "It shouldn't matter if he's an executive or not," she remarked to her seatmate. "No one should be treated that way." At Skyline headquarters in Dallas, CEO Harold Thompson was reviewing a preliminary report that Jamal had managed to send through the aircraft's Wi-Fi before takeoff. The report documented the gate agent's behavior and included a brief note about captain confrontation details to follow. Thompson frowned, immediately concerned. He picked up his phone to call the operations center. "This is Thompson. I need status updates on Flight 2845 from Atlanta to San Francisco. And I need them in real time." Back on the aircraft, Captain Brooks's voice came over the PA system again, noticeably stiffer than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our initial descent into the San Francisco area. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for arrival." Jamal closed his laptop, having completed a thorough evaluation report. Beyond the obvious incident with the captain, he had documented dozens of subtler issues. Disparities in service based on perceived status, operational inefficiencies, and moments of excellent service that offered hope for improvement. As he looked out the window at the clouds below, Jamal thought about the complex challenge ahead. This wasn't just about one captain or one flight. It was about addressing systemic biases that affected the entire passenger experience. And now, with his cover effectively blown, he wondered how the rest of this journey would unfold. The real test was still to come. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Brooks." The PA system crackled to life as the aircraft began to encounter light chop. "We're expecting some turbulence as we cross the Rocky Mountains. I've turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please return to your seats and secure your seatbelts." No sooner had the announcement ended than the aircraft shuddered violently. Drinks spilled overhead, bins rattled, and a chorus of startled gasps filled the cabin. What had been forecast as light turbulence was rapidly intensifying into something more serious. In first class, Jamal tightened his seatbelt as the plane dropped suddenly, then rose with equal abruptness. Next to him, Mrs. Wilson let out a frightened cry as her reading glasses flew off her face and her drink toppled into her lap. "It's all right," Jamal reassured her, instinctively reaching out to steady the elderly woman as the aircraft bucked again. "Commercial planes are built to handle much worse than this." Captain Brooks's voice, tense but controlled, came over the intercom again. "Flight attendants, secure the cabin and take your seats immediately." The turbulence worsened, transforming the routine flight into a white-knuckle experience. In the cockpit, Brooks and Miller worked in focused tandem, their earlier tension temporarily forgotten as they navigated through the violent air currents. "San Francisco Center Skyline, 2845, requesting immediate altitude change," Brooks radioed. "We're experiencing severe turbulence at flight level 370. Skyline, 2845, cleared to descend to flight level 330. Reports indicate clear air at that altitude." As the pilots managed the challenging conditions, Veronica and Tyler struggled to reach their jump seats. The aircraft lurched again, sending Tyler stumbling into the first-class galley. Aluminum service carts slid across the floor despite their brakes. "I need help," Mrs. Wilson called out suddenly. The elderly passenger was hyperventilating, clutching at her chest in apparent distress. Without hesitation, Jamal unbuckled his seatbelt and reached across to assist her, bracing himself against the seat in front as the plane continued to shake. "Take slow, deep breaths," he instructed calmly, demonstrating the technique while maintaining eye contact with the frightened woman. "In through your nose, out through your mouth." Veronica hurried over, medical kit in hand. "Sir, you need to return to your seat immediately," she said, though her tone lacked conviction as she witnessed Jamal's effective intervention. "She might be having a panic attack," Jamal explained, still helping Mrs. Wilson regulate her breathing. "My mother is a nurse. I've seen this before." Another violent jolt sent Veronica stumbling. Jamal caught her arm with his free hand, preventing what could have been a nasty fall. "Thank you," she said, genuine gratitude in her voice. Together they attended to Mrs. Wilson, whose breathing was gradually normalizing. Throughout the cabin, passengers gripped armrests and prayed as the turbulence continued. Yet amid the chaos, an unexpected moment of community emerged as passengers looked out for one another, offering reassurance, helping secure loose items, and providing comfort to those most frightened. In the cockpit, Brooks and Miller worked methodically to navigate the difficult conditions. Despite his personal failings, Brooks was an experienced pilot, and his technical skills were evident as he skillfully guided the aircraft through the turbulent airspace. As they descended to the clearer air at 330,000 feet, a technical issue arose. The PA system, which operated on a separate circuit from the cockpit communications, malfunctioned in an unusual way. Instead of broadcasting announcements to the cabin, it began transmitting cockpit conversations to the first-class cabin. "Smooth on the controls," Brooks instructed Miller as they leveled off. "We're clear of the worst of it now." Passengers in first class exchanged surprised glances as they suddenly became privy to the cockpit dialogue. "Roger that," Miller responded, vertical speed stabilizing. "I'll tell you one thing." Brooks continued, unaware that his words were being broadcast. "This whole situation with that Washington kid is a mess. Thompson's diversity hire is going to be writing a scathing report now." Jamal, still helping Mrs. Wilson, froze at hearing his name. Around him, first-class passengers looked uncomfortable as the captain's unfiltered thoughts filled their cabin. "You don't know that he's a diversity hire," Miller's voice objected. "His resume is impressive. Howard MBA Operational Innovations at 2 regional carriers." "Please," Brooks scoffed. "Thompson's feeling the pressure from the board to diversify executive leadership. You think it's coincidence he hired a black kid barely old enough to rent a car?" Jamal maintained his composure, though his jaw tightened visibly. The passengers around him shifted uncomfortably, many avoiding eye contact out of second-hand embarrassment. "His age and race don't negate his qualifications," Miller countered his frustration, evident even through the tinny speakers. "Look, I've been flying longer than he's been alive," Brooks retorted. "These corporate types with their fancy degrees don't understand the real world of aviation. They think they can fix everything with spreadsheets and diversity seminars." In seat 3C, Benjamin Hayes looked directly at Jamal and shook his head apologetically. "This is inexcusable," he mouthed silently. Veronica, who had been attending to another passenger, returned to find the first-class cabin eerily quiet despite the ongoing turbulence. When she heard the captain's voice through the speakers, she realized what was happening and rushed to the galley to contact the cockpit. "Captain, the PA system is malfunctioning," she reported urgently through the interphone. "Your conversation is being broadcast to first class." There was a moment of stunned silence from the cockpit. "Understood." Brooks finally responded, his voice tight. "We'll reset the system." The cabin fell silent as the PA system was shut down. The turbulence had eased considerably, but the atmosphere in first class remained charged with tension. Mrs. Wilson, now recovered from her panic attack, placed a wrinkled hand on Jamal's arm. "Thank you, young man," she said earnestly, "and I'm sorry for everything." Jamal nodded acknowledgement, his expression thoughtful as he made his way back to his seat. He had just witnessed both the worst and the best of Skyline Airways in the span of minutes. Captain Brooks' prejudice contrasted sharply with co-pilot Miller's defense and the moment of human connection that had emerged during the crisis. As the aircraft stabilized and the seatbelt sign was switched off, Veronica approached Jamal.
Mr. Washington, I want you to know that I'll be filing a report about the PA system incident.
It was completely unprofessional, and it doesn't represent all of us at Skyline. I appreciate that, Veronica, Jamal replied. I've noted both the problems and the positive moments in my evaluation. Your assistance during the turbulence was exemplary. Behind Veronica, several passengers had formed a subtle alliance, having witnessed both the earlier confrontation and now the captain's unfiltered opinions. Their expressions communicated a shared understanding of the situation and a quiet solidarity with Jamal. As the flight continued towards San Francisco, Jamal realized that this journey had revealed far more than operational inefficiencies or service gaps. It had exposed the complex human dynamics that shape the passenger experience, dynamics that no amount of corporate training could fully address without honest acknowledgement of the underlying issues. He turned to his laptop and added a new section to his report titled Cultural Assessment. The recommendations he would make to CEO Thompson would need to go far beyond procedural changes. Real transformation would require courage and honesty, starting at the top. With 45 minutes remaining before landing in San Francisco, Captain Brooks left the cockpit during a scheduled break. First Officer Miller took control of the aircraft while Brooks stretched his legs and used the forward lavatory. It was standard procedure, but today, the timing couldn't have been worse. As Brooks emerged from the lavatory, he found himself face to face with Jamal in the first-class galley. The confined space made the encounter unavoidable. For a moment, neither man spoke, the tension between them palpable. Flight attendant Tyler, sensing the potential for conflict, busied himself nearby, ostensibly arranging snacks, but actually positioning himself to intervene if necessary. Mr. Washington Brooks finally acknowledged, his tone clipped. Captain Brooks. Jamal replied evenly. Brooks glanced around at the first-class passengers, many of whom were watching the interaction with undisguised interest. He lowered his voice. Perhaps we should speak privately. I believe we're as private as we need to be, Jamal responded, maintaining a professional demeanor despite the adrenaline coursing through him. After all, you didn't seem concerned about privacy when you tried to remove me from first class earlier. The captain's face flushed. Look, if you've got a problem with how I run my aircraft, you can take it up with Thompson. I've been with this airline for nearly 3 decades. And in those 3 decades, Jamal asked quietly, how many other passengers have you told to go back where they belong? Brooks stepped closer, using his height advantage to look down at Jamal. Don't make this about race, son. This is about respect for the uniform and the chain of command. You corporate types, coming in with your fancy degrees thinking you understand aviation better than those of us who've spent our lives in the air. This isn't about degrees or corporate politics, Jamal countered, refusing to be intimidated. It's about basic human dignity. Every passenger deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their appearance. You're playing the race card, Brooks accused, his voice rising slightly despite his attempt to keep the conversation contained, using it to climb the corporate ladder. Several passengers audibly gasped at the captain's words. Tyler stepped forward, concern evident on his face. Captain, perhaps. Brooks waved him off dismissively. Stay out of this, Johnson. Jamal remained composed, though his eyes flashed with controlled anger. Let me be clear, Captain Brooks. I didn't need any card to earn my position. My work speaks for itself. And right now, your work is speaking volumes about the culture at Skyline Airways. From his pocket, Jamal produced a small notebook where he'd been documenting the flight. In the last 3 hours, I've observed 17 instances of differential treatment based on perceived passenger status or race. I've noted operational inefficiencies that cost this airline approximately $6,000 per flight, and I've witnessed both exemplary service and inexcusable behavior from crew members." He closed the notebook deliberately. "My evaluation will reflect all of this, the good and the bad. It will be comprehensive, detailed, and above all, fair." Brooks scoffed. "Fair? You came onto my aircraft with an agenda. Thompson sent you to find problems, so of course you found them." "I came to observe reality," Jamal corrected him. "And reality is what I'll report." By now, co-pilot Travis Miller had emerged from the cockpit, having been alerted by a flight attendant about the confrontation. "Everything all right out here?" he asked, his gaze moving between Brooks and Jamal. "Our new EVP and I were just having a frank discussion about airline operations," Brooks said with barely concealed sarcasm. Miller looked at Jamal apologetically. "Mr. Washington, I want to assure you that many of us at Skyline are committed to providing excellent service to all our passengers." "I've noted that as well," First Officer Miller Jamal acknowledged. "Your professionalism during the turbulence was exemplary." From Seat 3B, Benjamin Hayes had been recording portions of the exchange on his phone. When Brooks noticed this, his expression darkened further. "Photography and recording on this aircraft are prohibited," he snapped. Actually, Hayes countered Skyline's own policy states that passengers may record their experience as long as it doesn't interfere with crew member duties or compromise safety. "I checked the in-flight magazine." Brooks looked as though he might argue further, but Miller placed a subtle hand on his captain's shoulder. "Sir, we need to prepare for our approach to San Francisco." For a moment, Brooks seemed ready to escalate the situation further. Then, with visible effort, he regained his composure. "This isn't over," he told Jamal quietly before turning to return to the cockpit. "You're right about that," Jamal agreed. "This is just the beginning of necessary changes at Skyline Airways." As Brooks disappeared into the cockpit, a subtle ripple of approval moved through the first-class cabin. Several passengers nodded respectfully to Jamal, while others looked relieved that the confrontation hadn't escalated further. Tyler approached Jamal once the captain was gone. "I'm sorry you had to experience that, sir. For what it's worth, many of us have been hoping for leadership that would address these issues." "Then help me understand them," Jamal replied. "What's working well? What needs to change? The people doing the work every day often have the best insights." Tyler seemed surprised by the genuine invitation to provide input. "Well, for starters, our diversity training is treated as a box-checking exercise rather than meaningful education, and the reporting system for incidents of discrimination has no real accountability." As Tyler shared his perspectives, Veronica joined the conversation, adding her own observations from years of service. For the remainder of the break period, Jamal listened attentively, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. This impromptu focus group in the galley provided Jamal with invaluable insights directly from the frontline staff, the kind of authentic feedback that rarely made it up the chain of command in corporate settings. As the discussion concluded, Jamal thanked the crew members for their honesty. "Change won't happen overnight," he told them, "but it will happen." Returning to his seat, Jamal found Benjamin Hayes waiting with a business card. "I practice employment law," Hayes explained quietly. "If you need a witness statement about what happened today, I'd be happy to provide one." Jamal accepted the card with a nod of thanks. "I hope it won't come to that, but I appreciate the offer." As the aircraft began its descent into San Francisco, Jamal finalized his notes and recommendations. The confrontation with Captain Brooks had been uncomfortable, even painful, but it had also crystallized exactly why CEO Thompson had recruited him to Skyline Airways. This wasn't just about improving service metrics or operational efficiency. It was about transforming a culture that had allowed bias and discrimination to persist unchecked for too long. And despite the challenges ahead, Jamal felt ready for the task. The real work was about to begin. Skyline, 2845 San Francisco approach. Descend and maintain 7,000 feet. Expect vectors for the ILS approach to runway 28R. The air traffic controller's voice crackled through the headsets. Descend to 7000, Skyline 2845. Captain Brooks responded mechanically, his mind clearly elsewhere, despite the complex approach procedure ahead. Inside the cockpit, the tension between Brooks and First Officer Miller was thick enough to cut with a knife. Brooks' hands gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white as he guided the aircraft through its initial descent. Weather report shows gusting crosswinds at 22 knots. Miller reported, scanning the information on his display. Visibility dropping with marine layer moving in. Under normal circumstances, the challenging conditions would have commanded Brooks' complete attention. San Francisco International was notorious among pilots for its tricky approaches, particularly in changing weather conditions. But today, Brooks seemed distracted, his movements on the controls slightly jerky rather than his usual smooth precision. Captain Miller ventured cautiously, "The approach is getting complicated. Shall we run the checklist?" Brooks nodded curtly, but his eyes kept darting to the cabin door, his mind clearly still processing the confrontation with Jamal. As they worked through the landing preparation, Brooks made a minor error in the sequence. "Sir, we skipped the hydraulic pressure confirmation," Miller pointed out respectfully. "I know the damn checklist," Miller Brooks snapped, though he immediately corrected the oversight. In the first-class cabin, passengers had begun the usual pre-landing rituals, stowing electronic devices, raising seatbacks, finishing final beverages. Jamal observed these activities while completing his evaluation notes, occasionally glancing out the window at the fog-shrouded San Francisco Bay coming into view. The aircraft suddenly shuddered as it encountered a pocket of turbulence more severe than typical approach chop. Several passengers gasped as the plane dropped momentarily before stabilizing. Skyline 2845. Be advised, we're getting reports of increasing wind shear on final approach, the controller warned. Use caution. Understood, Brooks acknowledged. Request vectors for the RNAV approach instead. The controller provided the new approach instructions, which would give them a slightly different path to the runway, one less affected by the developing wind shear. It was a good call under the circumstances, but it meant reprogramming the flight management computer quickly. As Brooks attempted to input the new approach coordinates, his fingers slipped, entering an incorrect waypoint. Miller noticed immediately. "Captain, that waypoint puts us too close to the terrain," he said quietly. Brooks stared at the screen, seemingly taking longer than usual to process the information. "Right," he finally muttered, correcting the error. Miller's concern was growing by the second. He had flown with Brooks for over 3 years and had never seen him this distracted during a critical phase of flight. The confrontation with Jamal had clearly affected him deeply, perhaps triggering an internal crisis as the captain faced the possibility that his long career might be tarnished by the day's events. San Francisco Tower Skyline 2845 established on the RNAV approach. Runway 28R. Brooks reported as they aligned with their final approach path. Skyline 2845 cleared to land. Runway 28R. Wind 290 at 24, gusting 30 knots. The crosswind had intensified, requiring even more precise handling. Brooks began the final descent, but his corrections for the gusting crosswind seemed delayed and exaggerated. "Speed's bleeding off," Miller noted with growing concern, watching the airspeed indicator drop toward the minimum approach speed. Brooks overcorrected, adding too much thrust and sending their speed climbing above the optimal approach range. The aircraft's sink rate increased, putting them slightly below the ideal glide path. Passengers felt the unusual motion, the aircraft pitching more than it should during a stable approach. In first class, Jamal and other experienced travelers exchanged concerned glances. "Something's not right," Benjamin Hayes murmured, tightening his seatbelt. Inside the cockpit, Miller faced a critical decision. FAA regulations and airline procedures were clear. If an approach became unstable, the proper action was to execute a go-around, abort the landing climb to a safe altitude, and try again. But suggesting this meant challenging the captain's authority during an already tense situation. Captain Miller said firmly, "Our approach is becoming unstable. Consider a go-around." Brooks didn't immediately respond, his focus seemingly fixed on forcing the aircraft onto the correct path, rather than acknowledging that they needed to abort this attempt. The cockpit warning system suddenly blared to life. "Wind shear. Wind shear." This automated alert snapped Brooks back to full attention. In this moment, his decades of experience and training took over, transcending his personal distress. With textbook precision, he executed the wind shear escape maneuver, adding full power and establishing the proper climb attitude. Going around, Brooks announced both to the tower and to his first officer, his voice finally steady and professional. "Skyline 2845 executing wind shear escape maneuver. Skyline 2845, roger the go-around. Climb and maintain 3000 feet. Expect vectors for resequencing." As the aircraft climbed away from danger, Brooks seemed to undergo a transformation. The skilled pilot, who had built a respected career over decades, reasserted himself, handling the aircraft with his characteristic precision. Once they were safely established in the climb, Brooks turned to Miller. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You were right to call out the unstable approach." It was a small moment of humility from a man not known for admitting mistakes, but it revealed something important about Brooks's character. Despite his prejudices and defensive behavior, he was ultimately committed to the safety of his character. Passengers and crew, as they leveled off at 3000 feet and prepared for a second approach attempt, Brooks made a decision. "I'd like you to take the controls for this landing, Travis," he said, using Miller's first name, something he rarely did. Miller looked surprised, but nodded. "I have the aircraft," he confirmed, taking the controls. "I'll handle the radios and systems," Brooks continued. "My head's not where it needs to be for this approach." It was perhaps the most difficult admission Brooks had made in his career, acknowledging that his emotional state had compromised his performance and voluntarily stepping back from a task he had always insisted on controlling. As Miller skillfully guided the aircraft onto its second approach, Brooks handled the supporting duties with professional precision. Together they functioned as the team they were trained to be, setting aside personal tensions in service of their shared responsibility. In the cabin, passengers remained unaware of the specific dynamics playing out in the cockpit, but they could feel the difference. In the second approach, the aircraft's movement smooth and controlled as it descended toward the Ouse. Runway. Jamal watched the fog-shrouded airport come into view, thinking about what he had observed throughout this remarkable flight. The incidents of prejudice and discrimination were troubling, but not surprising. What had surprised him was witnessing both the worst and the best of human nature in response to crisis, including Captain Brooks' apparent ability to recognize when his own limitations might endanger others. As the aircraft's wheels touched down smoothly on runway 28R, Jamal wondered if there might be more complexity to Richard Brooks than he had initially assumed, and whether that might offer a foundation for the difficult conversations and changes that lay ahead. As Flight 2845 taxied to the gate at San Francisco International Airport, an unusual atmosphere pervaded the cabin. The passengers, having witnessed the confrontation and endured the turbulent approach, seemed reluctant to return to the mundane routine of deplaning. Instead, many remained seated even after the seatbelt sign was turned off, as if sensing that this journey's conclusion would be as remarkable as its course. Captain Brooks' voice came over the PA system one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. Local time is 2:17 p.m. and the temperature is 65 degrees. On behalf of First Officer Miller, who executed our landing, and our cabin crew, thank you for flying with Skyline Airways today. The standard announcement was delivered with professional courtesy, but notably missing was Brooks's usual jovial sign-off about hoping to see passengers on future flights. Perhaps he too recognized that this had been no ordinary journey. As passengers began to gather their belongings, Veronica approached Jamal. "Mr. Washington, Captain Brooks has requested that you remain on board briefly after other passengers have deplaned. Also, there's someone waiting to meet you at the gate." Jamal nodded, understanding that the confrontation that had begun during boarding would find its resolution here in San Francisco. The deplaning process proceeded normally, with many passengers pausing to exchange meaningful glances with Jamal as they passed his seat. Benjamin Hayes handed him a business card with a personal cell phone number scribbled on the back. "Whatever happens next, you've got allies," Hayes said simply before making his way down the aisle. Mrs. Wilson, the elderly woman Jamal had helped during the turbulence, stopped by his seat. "Young man, I want to thank you again, and to apologize for my assumptions when we first met. An old woman can still learn new lessons, it seems." "We all have learning to do, Mrs. Wilson," Jamal replied with genuine warmth. As the last passenger exited, an unexpected silence fell over the normally bustling aircraft. Jamal remained seated, allowing the crew time to complete their post-flight duties and prepare for whatever conversation would follow. Finally, Captain Brooks emerged from the cockpit, still in his uniform, but with his captain's hat removed a small but noticeable break from protocol that suggested a shift in attitude. Behind him came First Officer Miller, followed by Veronica Tyler and the other flight attendants. They assembled in the first-class cabin, an impromptu gathering of the entire crew. Brooks cleared his throat. "Mr. Washington, I've been flying for Skyline Airways for 28 years. In that time, I've prided myself on being a professional. Today," he paused, visibly struggling with his words today, "I failed to meet that standard." The admission hung in the air, surprising in its directness. Brooks continued, "My behavior was unacceptable, not just toward you as an executive of this airline, but toward you as a passenger and as a person." Jamal maintained eye contact with the captain, but didn't immediately respond, allowing him space to continue. "I could offer explanations about stress or changing times or old habits," Brooks went on, "but excuses don't change facts. The fact is, I let my prejudices affect my professional conduct. For that, I owe you an apology." The sincerity in Brooks's voice suggested this was not merely damage control, but a genuine moment of reflection. Captain Brooks Jamal finally responded, rising to his feet. "I appreciate your apology, and I want to acknowledge something as well. When faced with a dangerous landing situation, you set aside your personal feelings and made the right decision for the safety of everyone on board. That speaks to your professionalism as a pilot, if not your initial interaction with me as a passenger." He looked around at the assembled crew. "My job at Skyline isn't to fire people or assign blame. It's to identify problems and implement solutions that make this airline better for everyone, passengers and employees alike." From his briefcase, Jamal withdrew several copies of his preliminary report. This flight revealed significant issues that need addressing, from service inconsistencies to biases that affect the passenger experience. But it also showed me the potential within Skyline crew members who intervened when they witnessed discrimination, a first officer who spoke up when safety was at stake, and flight attendants who provided excellent service despite challenging circumstances. As he handed the reports to key crew members, the aircraft door reopened. CEO Harold Thompson himself entered the cabin, surprising everyone present. At 62, Thompson was a commanding figure with silver hair and the weathered face of someone who had started his aviation career as a baggage handler decades earlier. "I see you've all met our new EVP," Thompson said, surveying the gathered crew. "When I recruited Jamal from Howard, I told him I wanted honest assessments, not sugar-coated reports. From what I've heard about this flight, that's exactly what he's delivered. Brooks stepped forward. Harold, I've already apologized to Mr. Washington, but I should explain to you as well. Thompson raised a hand. Richard, we'll have a private conversation about today's events. But first, I want to address everyone here. The CEO looked around at the assembled crew. Skyline Airways was founded 60 years ago with a simple mission to connect people with excellence and dignity. Somewhere along the way, we've lost sight of the dignity part of that equation, not just for our passengers, but for our employees too. He gestured to Jamal. That's why I brought Mr. Washington on board. Not as a token or a diversity hire, as some have suggested, but because he has the vision and courage to help us reclaim what made this airline great in the first place. Thompson turned specifically to Captain Brooks. Richard, you and I have worked together for over 2 decades. I know you're a damn good pilot. But I also know that this incident today wasn't isolated. It was just the first time you encountered a passenger who happened to be in a position to hold you accountable. Brooks' face flushed, but he nodded in acknowledgement of the truth. So here's what happens next, Thompson continued. Mr. Washington will be implementing a comprehensive review of our service protocols, crew training, and company culture. Everyone, and I mean everyone, from me down to our newest hire will participate in this process. The CEO's gaze moved deliberately around the cabin. Change is coming to Skyline Airways. Some of you will embrace it, others will resist it. But all of you will be part of it one way or another. Jamal stepped forward to stand beside Thompson. I'd like to add something important, he said. This isn't about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about creating an airline where everyone, regardless of their appearance, background, or position, is treated with respect and dignity. He looked directly at Brooks. Captain, you have decades of valuable experience and technical expertise. That shouldn't be discarded because of mistakes, even serious ones. But moving forward requires acknowledgement, accountability, and a genuine commitment to change. Brooks met Jamal's gaze, a complex mixture of emotions playing across his face. Mr. Washington, he said, finally, I've spent my career teaching young pilots about the importance of proper procedures and protocols. Perhaps it's time for me to be the student again. It wasn't a grand declaration of transformation, but it was an opening, a willingness to consider change that had been absent before. 1 month later, Jamal Washington stood at Gate 32 at Atlanta International Airport preparing to board another Skyline Airways flight. But this time there was no pretense of anonymity. He wore a company ID badge identifying him as Executive Vice President of Operations, and the gate agents greeted him with genuine respect rather than suspicion. The changes he had begun implementing were still in their early stages, but already showing promising results. A new reporting system allowed crew members to document instances of discrimination without fear of retaliation. Comprehensive training programs were being developed to address both conscious and unconscious biases. And perhaps most significantly, a mentorship initiative paired veteran employees with new hires from diverse backgrounds, creating opportunities for meaningful connection and understanding across different experiences. As Jamal boarded the aircraft, he was greeted by a diverse flight crew led by Captain Travis Miller, recently promoted after demonstrating exceptional leadership during the incident on Flight 2845. And serving as first officer was Keisha Johnson, the professor from UC Berkeley, who had witnessed the confrontation from economy class and subsequently revealed her background as a licensed commercial pilot who had left aviation due to the gross hostile culture she had encountered. Welcome aboard, Mr. Washington, Miller said with genuine warmth. Thank you, Captain Miller, Jamal replied. How's the new position treating you? Still adjusting, but it's a welcome challenge, Miller admitted. And our new mentorship program is making a real difference. Even Captain Brooks has taken on 2 mentees. Jamal raised an eyebrow in surprise. Brooks is participating in the mentorship program. Voluntarily, Miller confirmed. He still has his moments, but he's making an effort. That's more than many expected. As Jamal settled into his seat, he reflected on the journey that had begun with that confrontation in the aisle just 1 month earlier. The road ahead would not be easy. Changing entrenched attitudes and systems never was. Some veteran employees had resisted the new initiatives, and a few had chosen early retirement rather than adapt. But watching the diverse crew work together with professional precision, Jamal felt cautiously optimistic. Real change was happening at Skyline Airways, not overnight, but incrementally, meaningfully, and with growing momentum. Before takeoff, he made a brief phone call. "Mom, I'm about to head back to San Francisco." "Yes, things are going well." "Remember Captain Brooks, the one I told you about?" He smiled slightly. "Let's just say people can surprise you sometimes." As the aircraft doors closed and the safety demonstration began, Jamal looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. His mother had been right, as she so often was. No matter how high he flew, he needed to keep his feet on the ground. Because the work of creating a more equitable world in aviation and beyond was as challenging as it was essential. But for the first time in a long while, Jamal Washington felt the winds of change beginning to lift everyone higher. Jamal Washington's journey on Flight 2845 teaches us several powerful lessons about confronting discrimination and creating meaningful change. First, maintaining dignity and composure in the face of prejudice isn't weakness, it's strategic strength. By documenting incidents rather than responding with equal hostility, Jamal preserved his credibility and positioned himself to effect systemic change. Second, true leadership isn't about wielding power over others, but empowering people to grow. Jamal didn't seek to punish Captain Brooks, but instead created pathways for transformation through accountability and education. He recognized that lasting change requires bringing people along rather than casting them aside. Third, discrimination doesn't exist in isolation. It's embedded in systems. By addressing both individual behaviors and institutional practices, Jamal tackled the root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. His comprehensive approach acknowledged that meaningful change must operate at multiple levels simultaneously. Finally, the story reminds us that progress isn't instant, but incremental. Even Brooks, despite his initial hostility, showed capacity for growth when given appropriate structure and incentive. This suggests that, with the right approach, even entrenched attitudes can evolve over time. What would you do? If you were in Jamal's position, would you have responded with the same composure? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've witnessed or experienced discrimination, what strategies helped you navigate that situation? Don't forget to like this video if you found Jamal's journey inspiring. Subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience and transformation, and share with someone who needs to hear that positive change is possible, even in challenging environments. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most turbulent flights lead to the most meaningful destinations in our collective journey toward equality.